The goal of today's workshop is really simple. It's to create focus. We call this the focus year because most people head into a new year with the opposite of focus, with a little bit of regret, a little bit of remorse, a little bit of confusion about the year that passed, and a lack of clarity on what they're going to focus on in the year that comes. And because we're human beings and we're by nature ambitious, and certainly all of you, by virtue of the fact that you're in this room, are ambitious, you have lots of things you want to get done. And you have lots of things that you want to move forward with, and you have lots of things that you want to achieve. But you've also probably come to realize over the course of your time on this planet that you cannot have everything at once, right? You can have everything, just not at the same time. You cannot do everything at the same time. You cannot achieve all your goals together, right? You have to sequence out where you're going to focus and where you're going to put your finite energy, right? The greatest weapon against time is focus. That's really the theme of today's conversation. Time moves on. I remind my 10-year-old daughter whenever she's late to get ready for hockey practice, time doesn't stop for you, Khadija. that's the conversation we have all the time. Time does not stop for you. You will not outrun time. You will not outrace time. Time is going to win. The best weapon that we have against time is focus. As Rex said, removing the unnecessary so the necessary can speak. And today we're going to walk you through a process of getting that focus, creating that focus so we can make monumental progress next year on the things that truly matter. Okay. So here's what we're going to cover today. We'll talk a little bit about why focus. We're going to put you through a couple of exercises around finding focus. By the way, today is very actionable. You're going to do some work. It's not going to be listening to Amit and Carrie speak, although we'll be doing some of that, but it's going to be action-based, exercise-based. We're going to have you do things. We're going to have you share those things with the group. We're going to have you talk about those things, get you clarity on your plan today, here and now, and send you away with some homework too, to refine and to optimize and to fine tune. Okay. So a couple exercises around finding focus. We're going to introduce you to a concept that some of you may be familiar with, or a tool called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results, as being the tool through which you're going to create focus next year. And finally, I'm expecting a lot of vibrant discussion and Q&A based on what you come up with over the course of the next 40 to 60 minutes. All right, why focus? So I'm going to switch screens here. Who here has heard either Carrie or I talk about bottlenecks and the theory of constraints? Give me a yay in the comments. Let me know if you've heard us talk about this before. Theory of constraints and bottlenecks. I don't know how you haven't heard us talk about this before. I don't know how this could possibly be new information, but let me give you the brief, right? Just in case it's new information or you need a refresher. Theory of constraints, really conceptualized by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ellie Goldratt, who wrote a book. It's a novel called The Goal. And in my estimation, it's the most powerful business book I've ever read. And it's required reading for anybody who calls themselves an entrepreneur. Okay. And The Goal, it introduces this idea of the theory of constraints, and it's set in a manufacturing setting where the theory of constraints and bottlenecks are most apparent, most obvious, and most logically the path to optimization, right? And here's how it goes in a nutshell. Every system has inputs and outputs. So think about a manufacturing setting. You have raw materials that go into manufacturing process. Those materials get put through a system, this machine, that machine, this weld, that whatever. I don't know anything about manufacturing. I don't know what goes on there. There's systems, right? There's things, machines that do things to raw material, right? At the end of the day, they produce an output, widgets, what have you, right? Title of the book again, Alex, is The Goal by Dr. Ellie Goldratt. And the theory of constraints is really simple. It states that in every system, there is a major bottleneck, and there are minor bottlenecks. Okay, there's a major bottleneck, and there are minor bottlenecks. And any time spent on non-bottleneck issues or resources, or minor bottleneck issues and resources, is time wasted. Because if we can accept the premise that our energy, our effort, our time, our focus is limited, it's a limited resource, then we ought to put our energy towards the activities that are going to have the highest impact on the system, i.e., that produce the highest output for the system. And if that's true, then we must be able to identify the major bottleneck of the system and address that at the expense of everything else. Does that make sense? Y'all follow me? You got big bottlenecks, you got small bottlenecks, major, minor. And spending time on minor bottlenecks, smaller issues, smaller gaps at the expense of the big gaps that are ultimately constraining the output of the system overall is a waste of time. And in a business context, you will not grow as fast. You will spread yourself thin. You will waste unbelievable amounts of time and energy, and you won't get very far. You'll feel like what this feels like, which I think is hopefully resonant with a lot of people. It feels like you're doing a lot of things, but at the end of the day, nothing's really changing. Whereas if you're able to identify the major bottleneck in the system and you solve for that, you will see an impact on output by orders of magnitude greater than what you would find by solving minor bottlenecks. And Mazdak hit the nail on the head. Number $1 million question is how to identify that major bottleneck. That's the game. Once you know what it is and you're convinced it's the bottleneck, it's obvious. So I want to make this real for you. Here is our progression, as in boutique growth progression over the last 5 years. Every year there was a single bottleneck. And to be fair, I didn't know this at the time. I only read Ellie Goldratt's book like 12 months ago, and I found religion. Everything made sense. I think I'd intuitively thought this way in the past, but I wasn't able to assign language to it. And all of what you're seeing here makes a lot of sense to me in retrospect, but maybe didn't make sense at the time. I didn't know what was happening at the time. But here's what happened. In 2018, I was a solo consultant selling myself as a fractional director of marketing, for the past 4 or 5 years before that. And I didn't have time. I'd capped out on revenue, kind of low 6 figures, making decent money, but I capped out on time. I did not have time to take on more clients, to do marketing, to grow my business. I didn't have time. And therefore the output of the system was capped. I could not make more money, but I wanted to, but I didn't have time. That was my bottleneck. My focus was building 90-day pipeline. That was the one thing, my one major achievement in 2018 was building 90-day pipeline as the solution to addressing the major bottleneck of the system, which was my time. Those of you in Operation Scale know what I'm talking about because you're doing the same thing, right? Operation Scale is about building out that new offer that helps you solve for the bottleneck of time, labor. Okay. And then what happens is when you solve for the bottleneck, the good news and the bad news is this game never ends. There's always another bottleneck to solve for, but that's part of the fun. That's business, right? You get to graduate to the next bottleneck. What we're doing here is we're trading up in problems. We go from one problem to the next problem to the next problem. And that's what we get paid for. Okay. 2019, I'd solved the time problem. I had an offer now that scaled with time. Now I had a lead problem. I didn't have enough opportunity coming into my pipeline, into my funnel, to be able to fulfill and to fill seats in this new program. So my major focus in 2019 was advertising. Okay, some of you have probably seen the ad by now of me selling consulting services on the streets with a trench coat, right? And going out, we call it the hustling ad. That ad came out in October of 2019. That was really where things took off for us. And we thought we really nailed advertising at that stage. Okay, that was the focus. I did other things that year. Okay, don't get me wrong. But my main strategic priority and focus was cracking advertising so I would have lead flow and organic marketing. But by then organic marketing was pretty much dialed in at this stage. The focus was cracking advertising. And then we did. And we had all these leads coming in. And I was taking 25 sales calls a week. And then once again, in 2022, time became the bottleneck. Okay, but now it was time selling. So my focus in 2020 rather, was building the sales team and building the delivery team. Because at the time I was doing all the sales myself and doing all the fulfillment myself. So sales team comes in, Carrie comes in, Carrie builds a fulfillment team, and now time is solved for. And long story short, 2021, marketing costs were a bigger bottleneck. We focused back in on advertising and optimizing there. And looking forward into 2022, our biggest bottleneck is going to become sales team capacity, and the sales team will become the focus again. So the reason I show you this is I don't believe we would have been able to grow. We roughly doubled every year here, roughly. There's no way in hell we would have been able to do that unless we had clarity on what the bottleneck was and clarity on what the focus was to solve for that bottleneck. If I had tried to do all of this stuff in 2020, I mean, not only would we not have grown as fast as we did, we would have imploded. Like I would have gone mad in the process, and even with this focus, it was, it was pretty taxing 2 years for me, right? Trying to do more than this would have been just a complete disaster. Does that make sense? All of this is to convey the importance of focus and identifying what those major bottlenecks are in your system so you can ultimately solve those and put the vast majority of your time and energy addressing those. Does this make sense? Y'all with me? Is everybody drinking the Kool-Aid on focus yet? That's really what I'm trying to do here. Have we all taken a sip? It tastes good. We want more. Yeah. Kool-Aid. Great. Focus. Awesome. Cool. So let's take our first step forward here together. So 2 exercises to kick us off here. It's pretty much impossible to find focus unless we're clear on where we are. Right? I mean, if we're plugging in a destination in our GPS, the GPS wants to know what your current location is. You go into Google Maps and you say, how do I get to here? They're going to say, well, where are you going from? Current location, current address. And so for us to find focus and determine what our next step is and determine the shortest path to our goals, we have to be really clear on where we are. So the first exercise we're going to do together here is not looking ahead. Okay, I messed up the headings here. Okay, this should say looking back. Okay, forgive me. Looking back, not looking ahead. Looking ahead is next. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look back. And I want you to reflect on the year that was. And I want you to reflect on 2 things in particular. One is, what are the accomplishments that you are most proud of? Now, this is a very important question because as entrepreneurs, we are, almost hardwired to strictly and solely look at the gap between where we are and where we want to be, our current results and our desired results. And if we stare too hard at that gap, we get down on ourselves and we lose energy and we lose motivation. And the fix to that is to look back at where we've come from. Because every single one of you in this room, likely high achievers, likely not satisfied with your current results, however, likely made monumental shifts forward in your business last year. And if you're thinking, oh, I'm not sure I did, there's some work to do here. Because I promise you did. You might not have visibility over those wins yet. You might not appreciate those wins yet. You might not see them as wins yet. But I promise you made strides this year. And you've got to develop the ability to find those and build on those, right? Because human nature is we need to feel like we're making progress. Just think about how much better you feel about yourself when you feel like you're making progress, when you feel like you're moving forward. You might not be at the destination yet, but you feel like you're making progress. You feel like things are shifting. You feel better about yourself. You stick to the path. You do the work is more effective. But when you feel like you're not making progress, what happens? You get down. Your energy takes a nosedive. Well, here's the thing. It is 100% in your control to get to a place where you feel like you're making progress. I just want to really just step on that point for a second. This question of, am I making progress or not, is for you to decide. You control your own narrative. Right? The greatest sale you're ever going to make is the sale that you make to yourself. And the sale that you have to make to yourself is that you are moving forward. You are progressing. Let's do the exercise. 2 questions. What accomplishments are you most proud of from the previous year? And secondly, what lessons do you want to carry with you? Right? Notice I didn't ask, what are you disappointed in? Where did you screw up? Where did you fail? Because you absolutely, I mean, if you are trying to do anything worthwhile, you failed last year. You made mistakes. You got knocked down. You got beat up. You got punched in the face. I did. But what I'm going to carry with me is not the bruises, not the scars, but the lessons. 2 things I want you to reflect on. I'm going to give you a very short 5 minutes. I'm going to call on at least a couple of you to share some of your learnings. 5 minutes on the clock starting now. Go for it. Okay, feel free to wrap up, but I'm going to ask a couple of people to volunteer at least one of their wins and at least one of their lessons. Ed, voluntold, by the way, not volunteer.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you.
So for wins, I tripled my revenue from last year. I learned and perfected virtual delivery. So being able to train 400 people virtually with NPS score of 85%, which I thought would be not possible ever. Like, how can you train people virtually? So a year and a half ago, like, was all live. I got $2 billion clients, Simplet and Mountaineer Farms. So I'm even wearing Simplet hoodie. They send it to me as a token of appreciation. And live trading in Sacramento went really well. I got 100% NPS score. I never had that one before with a very tough crowd. They're farmers, right? So then the farm is giving you 100%. So that was really interesting for a guy with a foreign accent. So these are my these are my wins. And as for lessons, I was not able to start my beta group for group coaching. Still not really clear on the purpose, so there's too much information and it's still unorganized. So like that, these are my lessons. If that makes sense.
Yeah, cool. Well, that's fantastic self-awareness and some huge wins. Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Ed. Roxanne, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. Thank you. I am most, I have a bunch of things, but one is I actually finished my 3rd master's in data science and business analytics this year. My children did really, while most people fell behind in COVID and virtual learning, my children are actually went well. And so I have 2 high honor students that are scoring in the top of the state on all of their exams. And so I kind of feel like a little bit, and as a result of sort of completing the degree and realizing that I raised children that actually know how to be competent and have character, I felt a lot more free to kind of, invest in me and realize that I probably don't need the 6th and 7th degree, and really focus on my business. And so I feel like the biggest lessons that I've learned from going through this program, in addition to creating sort of the results mechanism, I really had to sort of, I don't want to go too far, but I've learned who, not how. I've really learned how I operate and what is sort of, to build a business around what I actually want to do and what I don't want to do. And so figuring out how to deliver the value. And so, I mean, going through these exercises and just in terms of joining this program and going through this exercise left me with a lot of additional clarity. And I think the biggest problem that I have is that, and I think a lot of people in this group have it, I think all of us can hit a target if we define it. And so going back to, I think the hardest part when you're multi-talented and you know, just is really just focusing in on that kind of alignment. And so one of the key aspects of my business model was, you know, this alignment question. And as a result of that, I've kind of learned that the first test case of anything that you implement in business is yourself. And so that's really what I'm sort of focusing in on, and to better execute. I think it will help me choose the target better. And I cemented a bunch of strategic relationships. And I learned my superpower with clients is trust. So all of that was sort of, and the building around that. So that's about it. I know that was a lot, so I'm going to let other people speak.
It's a lot of wins, and friendly reminder to everybody. I didn't mention this explicitly, but don't neglect the personal wins, right? We're not like single-minded business droids. I hope, right? I hope we're not, you know, there's personal wins here that you want to celebrate, because those wins and the confidence, you can even just tell, you can tell from Roxanne's tone of voice how proud she is of her children and their accomplishments. And you can see just in that little, you know, that little excerpt from her, how that confidence is bleeding into business. Because that's how this works. Carolyn, please go ahead.
Hi, you guys have never seen me before. I'm repping my colleague, Julie Summerfoin from The Moment. She's like, this is going to be the best webinar you've attended all year. I can't make it, you go. So you're like, who's this noob? It's me. But she was not wrong. I was like, this is amazing. I'm already 4 pages of notes in. So I'm going to tell you that some of the biggest wins that The Moment experienced last year is we posted the largest profit in the company's history. We established an associate network to help us to release a really major bottleneck of time, and that has been instrumental in changing our fortunes. And I'm really proud of our maturing system of gathering data and using really strong business intelligence to make decisions. And I'm like, this is amazing. If I look back at where we were, 18 months ago to now, it's incredible. And some of the lessons that I'm taking forward, and they're a little bit personal and a little bit businessy, asking for help creates better outcomes faster. I hate asking for help, and this has been a hard learned lesson. One that I'm coming to terms with now as we emerge out of a crisis into something new is crisis management is a bit like heroin. Feels really good, but not that good for you. So I'm trying to figure out how to work and plan with a more strategic outlook rather than a really urgent outlook. And the last one I'll share, and maybe it's related a little bit to Roxanne, is that good goal setting needs milestones, metrics, check-ins, and mitigation. It's not enough to say, here's what we're going to do. We need to actively check in on how we're doing. And so these are lessons we're carrying forward.
Brilliant lessons. Reminded a friend of mine once commented on another friend of ours who is one of these very chaotic personalities. And he said, so-and-so is a real, and he did crisis management as a profession. Okay. And he said, so-and-so is a real expert in crisis management. So what he does is he's really, really adept at manufacturing crises and finding his way into a crisis so he can find his way out of them. And it's funny because that is, many entrepreneurs are afflicted with that disease, right? Because there's a dopamine hit that comes with a good crisis, right? And if you're not careful, you start creating crises of your own. Appreciate you sharing, Carolyn. We'll take Alex and then we'll move on to the next exercise.
So a couple of things. In terms of accomplishments, in the last year, we really consolidated and grew several really strong client relationships in some ways, in ways that I didn't necessarily even expect. And so that was great. There's an interesting lesson, and I used to run a commercial production company. I used to manage high level, film directors. And a lot of them would tell me they wanted to do better work. And so there's a lesson that I used to teach them that I now have to teach myself, which is that if you want to do better, you have to be better. So what they would find is that if I would do what they asked me to do, which is to get them in the mix, competing for better work, and then they would get frustrated because they didn't get it. And I would say, well, you're now competing with a better class of directors. So you have to be better because now you have to win the work from them. So I think that's an important lesson for us, because where we used to compete against a certain group of consultants, now we're finding ourselves in RFPs competing against Bain and McKinsey and people like that. They're not better than we are, and they don't have the specialty that we have, but they have a very distinct advantage, which is their name recognition and the heft that they carry with them. So I'm looking at us and saying, okay, if we're gonna compete in this world, we're going to have to be better. We're going to have to test and refine what we do, and the message and the offering and all the other stuff that you guys talk about all the time. We're going to have to be better if we're going to win in this world against people that are much bigger than we are and carry much greater name recognition.
Huge lesson. And we're going to talk about that next week, right? Yeah, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm keen to dig into that with you. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Excellent. All right. So at this stage, you should have some clarity on where you are, right? You reflected on the year that was, the wins, the learning lessons. It's probably not done. 5 minutes is not a lot of time to complete that exercise. Feel free to continue it after this, right? But you should have some clarity. The next thing I want to do now with you is let's look ahead. Okay. So this is very much about beginning with the end in mind. You should, by the way, this is outside the scope of today's presentation or workshop. You should have your end game defined as well. Like your end game, business vision, personal vision. Where do you want to be 10, 20, 30 years from now? That should be defined as well. We're not going to do it today, right? But today, what I want you to focus on is next year. Right. So if we're having this conversation December 31st of next year, the question I want you to answer is what has to happen in the next year for you to be satisfied, both personally and professionally. The language here is very important. For you to be satisfied, for you to be satisfied. This is not about hitting a number, unless hitting a number is going to make you satisfied. This is not about some arbitrary goal that somebody else enforced upon you or that people expect from you. What has to happen for you to be satisfied personally and professionally? Make that list. 5 minutes. Go. I'm going to jump in a little bit early here in the interest of time, and we'll start taking a couple of volunteers to share what they're looking forward to next year. And then we're going to transition into the next segment here. Ben, go ahead.
I just had like a broken brain revelation doing this. I need to fail more next year to be satisfied. I succeeded this year in almost everything I tried, which I think means I'm not trying hard enough. I have an issue with perfectionism. And so I'm afraid of going too far on things and being wrong. And I think to be satisfied next year, I need to make some mistakes publicly and learn, okay, that's the limit of where I am right now. And here's to the point Alex was making. Here's now where I have to improve to get where I want to go.
How does it feel when you succeed at everything you try?
It's weird because I succeeded everything I try by not believing in myself. So it's it's great to succeed at it all. And that is in no small part to everything that I've learned with this group of people and with you. But I I just feel like if I'm succeeding at everything, I'm not pushing hard enough. I need to try more things.
It's a brilliant insight. And I'm glad your broken brain got you there.
It was not at
By the
all
way,
how I was going
what
to come out of this.
for Ben sees it for what it is, right? But for the rest of us, if you continuously succeed at everything you try, the inevitable outcome is boredom. That is boring as hell. It gets old real quick. Failure keeps us on our toes. Failure is where the learning is, right? Failure engages our brain in ways that winning doesn't. You need it. It's fuel. Brilliant insight, Ben. Thanks for sharing. Anna.
Hello. I don't know if I actually meant to raise my hand. But I'll go.
Oh, you did.
Okay, I made a list of what has to happen for me to be satisfied. I got to make $1 million next year. I've got to take 200 of that out for myself. I've got to work about the same amount of hours as I'm currently working, and or like maintain the same level of health focus that I have right now. I'm doing really great at like gym and like working on some health problems that I have. I need to hire a business partner and, in my words, offload my bullshit to them that I don't want to do, or I'm not good at. It's just not for me. And I need my husband to, he is actually about to get a remote work job. So we can go do what we want to do and not be bound to like one location. And I got to figure out how to keep my cat happy at home when we're gone for a long time, which is kind of like a weird thing to say, but like that deeply, I worry about that one deeply, actually. So
It's okay. Cat people are weird, so we get it. We totally get who you are.
Well, the
where you're
dog
coming
I
from.
can take with me. The cat, not so much. That's it. 6 things.
Good.
Anna, I
Let's
have a friend who travels full time. I mean, she just goes from location to location to location. She doesn't have a permanent location, and she takes her cat with her everywhere she goes. So
That would be fantastic. He's an elderly cat though, so it's kind of, anyway, it's an easy problem to solve. I can do it.
I appreciate everybody's willingness to share and contribute here. We do need to get to the next segment. So I'm going to ask Carrie to kick us off with OKRs, but we're happy to circle back around at the end here for some more discussion, given how much time we have left by the time we get there. So we should be at a place now where we have clarity on the year that was. We've looked at some wins. We've noted some learning lessons. We've defined where we want to be. Now we're going to make that very concrete and instill and clarify and cement that focus. Ms. Miller, over to you.
Yes. So the question is, how does the rubber hit the road? And we're going to do this by using something called OKRs. And I know we dropped that, or that someone dropped that in the, I think it was the Operation Scale chat. And the question was, what's an OKR? So let's start with that. OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. And really, this is a way of just pulling together what it is that you're going to achieve and the things you're going to do to get yourself there. And I'll have a disclaimer here that there are a lot of ways to kind of, look at and define and get really specific about OKRs. We're going to stay pretty high level today because this is all about, giving direction, right? Setting yourself up for the things that you want to do. And we can talk in more depth on more obstacle calls about what that looks like specifically for you. But generally speaking, you have objectives and key results. And you look at the sentence at the bottom, I will objective, right? Complete this thing as measured by key results. So your objectives are the goals that you want to achieve, and you want those to be meaningful. And that's, a lot of everything that we've talked to up until now today has been about how to make the things that we want to do meaningful, right? You don't want to create objectives that are just because, the podcast you listened to last Thursday told you that they should be, or, your spouse thinks that's the case, although that may flow into meaningful in some cases, but you want to make sure that the goals you're setting are meaningful to you, because that is the only reason that you're going to put focus and attention to them. You want them to be specific, you want them to be action-oriented, and your objectives can be aspirational. So, It's up to you because you know yourself best as to what aspirational means to you, right? Some people are really driven by goals that are well beyond anything that they, are going to, concretely meet, but that's the thing that pulls them forward. Other people need to have goals that are aspirational, but still achievable, because actually meeting the goal is the thing that, gives them the buzz and keeps them moving forward. So you'll figure that out for yourself, but this is where you want to think about what are your aspirations. And then on the other side, you have your key results, and your key results are the things that are going to get you to your objectives. So these become much more specific, right? These are measurable. This is where you have specific metrics. I will do X of this, or, Y percentage of this. They're time bound. So you need to be really clear about by when you're going to achieve them. And here, use the description about aggressive yet realistic. So again, you don't want to sandbag your OKRs, right? You don't want to just create things then that, you just know you're going to be able to check off easily, because as you're finding, that's not going to help you push yourself, right? That's not going to get you where it is that you want to go. But you want them to be realistic enough that you are, again, being driven, but they are able to be completed. And this is where you start to look at things like resources and time and all the things that you need to make those things happen. So objectives, key results, and the sentence that I think is really, really helpful is this notion of when all key results are met, the objective is necessarily achieved. So when you go to build these, you're going to build them in a way that the key results that you set, when achieved, will mean that you've met your objective. So there's no gap, there's no kind of gray zone. It's very clear, and building that out, quite frankly, this is not, and we're going to go through this in half an hour or so today. What that's going to allow you to do is start to draft this, but this is a process that takes some time, right? It takes some iteration. It takes some really understanding what your priorities are. So what I'm going to present to you in the next 20 minutes or so is a framework, give you an opportunity to start to work on that, but just know that, there's work to be done to really get this nailed down in a way that is both inspiring and guiding, because that's really what you want this exercise to deliver to you. If we go to the next slide, we're going to look at a couple of samples, and I dropped two in here just so that you have something to kind of refer to. So first one, increase revenue to $1 million, and this is a quarterly objective, but we can use the same kind of language annually. So increase revenue to $1 million. In this particular case, what are the key results that are going to drive that? Two parts. One is number of deals. Second is pricing. So if we go back to the test that we talked about on the previous slide, if this organization closes 30 new deals and revises the pricing to $10 per user, they will hit their $1 million goal. So the key objectives, if completed, the key results, if completed, if met, will make the objective happen. Go to the next example. Again, and it's a little bit fuzzy, sorry about that, but I can read it to you for those on smaller screens. This is an OKR around delighting customers. So again, it's sort of aspirational, they kind of know what it means, but the real specifics come out in the key results. So create and stabilize customer onboarding process. This is a project that they're working on. Decrease churn rate from 15% to 5%. So very clear about what this is going to look like from a churn perspective, and increase their NPS from 6 to 9. So again, if we do these things, we will have delivered the objective that we have. I see your question about tool. We use a tool called ally.io. There are lots of tools out there. I do like that one. We've cycled through a couple. That one works well for us. Tool not necessary, but can certainly be helpful to keep it in front of you. So what questions do you have about what is an OKR? What is that going to look like before we jump into a little bit of practice, starting to build them out? Everybody's good?
Just a quick note here, folks. OKRs are a tool that's designed to instill focus. So this was actually conceptualized by Andy Grove at Intel back in the 80s. Popularized by Google in their, most significant growth stages. and then most recently articulated by John Doerr in his book, Measure What Matters. And in all these examples, OKRs were brought in to bring clarity to chaos. When there's a lot going on, OKRs were brought in to instill focus at an organizational level and to cascade that focus down across levels. Now, that may be true for you. That may be just, your solo focus issue, right? Either way, OKRs are the tool to instill focus, because when you decide on what your OKRs are for the year, the natural consequence of that is you shouldn't be doing a whole lot else.
So if you move to the build your OKRs slide. Exactly, to Ahmed's point, this is all about focus. And so I'm going to give you some time to start drafting your OKRs, but really important here, 3 to 5. And so this is a really difficult thing for people who, have a lot of irons in the fire, have a lot of interests, see a lot of things that could happen, right? There are a million things you could do, but making a list of all of the things, right? Everything that could potentially affect your business, that could push your business forward, means that you are going to split your attention, and you might make small gains in a whole bunch of areas, but you're not going to make the gains you need in the areas that are most important. And so I challenge you to create your list, but max at 5. And in a minute, we're going to talk about, how to narrow those down and do some work around that. But this is where you need to get really, really clear. So what is most important? This is not about a laundry list. So the goal here is to write your 3 to 5 objectives. Listed 5 prompts here. These happen to be prompts that we used when we were putting together our OKRs this year. So basically, profit, how you're making your money; product or service, what it is that you sell or do. So things that are specifically focused on your product or your delivery; people, who your team is. If your team is just you, then that also includes your personal growth, development, health, wellness, whatever it is that optimizes your ability to deliver. Promotion, how you get the word out, how you bring people on board. And then there's a 5th item called progress. And this is interesting because this is about what is the thing that you are going to do that will dramatically change your business. So all of the other things sort of happen, right? They're the things that exist in your business on a day-to-day. But is there something that you need or want to do in the coming year, or whatever the time frame is, that is going to make a big difference for your organization? So the goal will be to figure out what your top 3 to 5 are. And then the next question, of course, is what are the key results associated to those particular objectives? So what are the things that, as we said before, if achieved, will make sure that my objective is met? And you may not know all of these right now. It's really about understanding, kind of framework and what's required. Some of this you're going to have to go away and figure out, but getting the basics down now, and then we can have a conversation about it. We can work on it together moving forward. Key results as well, create focus. So it's also sometimes tempting to build your objective and then have the list of 30 things that are going to get you there. Same issue, narrow it down. You want to have no more than 3 or 5 key results for each objective. And dropped here as well a formula or a structure that you can use when you're putting your key objectives together. So it's basically verb plus what you're going to measure plus from X to Y. So I'm going to, for example, increase what I'm going to measure, monthly discovery calls, from 10 to 20.
Anna's asking, how do you deal with semi-redundant key results that ladder up the different objectives? We use the necessary but sufficient test, Anna. So for every objective, once we have key results listed, we ask ourselves, are all of these necessary for the objective to be met? And are they sufficient for the objective to be met? And if after asking those questions for both objectives, we still have redundant key results, that's fine, leave them there.
All right, ready to give it a go? Get started? So we're a little short on time, so I would say let's take 10 minutes and just start to draft this out. And then we will come back, we'll have some conversations, we'll answer some questions. And yeah, just give you whatever it is you need to continue to move forward, and then talk about how you can really build this out from here until you get started working on this stuff in the coming weeks.
Are we cool with people popping questions in the chat as we go here, Carrie?
Always.
Yeah. So as you're writing, pop into the chat if you have questions, and we're here.
Do you sometimes, when you're going through this exercise, reveal bottlenecks that you didn't realize you had?
That's the purpose of it.
Okay.
Among other things. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, 100%.
Because my key results, I had the same key result for 3 different, objectives. Like, this is what has to happen if this is going to start happening.
Yeah, because the finding the bottleneck is not always an obvious exercise, right? It's often very nuanced, and the exercise of writing OKRs is going to help you get more nuanced clarity on where the true bottleneck is. And Ed, to your point, if I find I need improvements in all 5 areas, how to focus, everyone needs improvement in all 5 areas. Like, that's not you. That's like everybody, every business in the world, right? So this is, again, where bottlenecks becomes important, right? Because we're talking about annual OKRs. So you can have annual OKRs that span all categories. You're probably not going to work on all 5 of them in Q1. So this is where now you can start to sequence, right? You can be that broad, not 10, but 5 in the year, but you might not work on all 5 in Q1, right? This is where you want to start to look at bottlenecks and anticipate the next bottleneck. So Q1, for example, and Carrie's going to speak to this in a moment, should only focus on immediate pressing major bottlenecks. But then you can probably anticipate, and you may not be right all the time, what the subsequent bottleneck will be in Q2, Q3, and Q4. And then you can sequence your OKRs accordingly. Does that make sense, Ed?
So let's call it time-wise for everybody. And then I think additionally, Ed, for you, if you go to the next slide, and you alluded to this before in answer to Anna's, yeah, I want to circle back to this because I think, it deserves a bit of time, and, I'm gonna give you the sneak peek, but this can really help you nail down the specificity and gain focus. So this is the necessary versus sufficient, or necessary and sufficient test. So here it speaks to key results, right? The language here, all these key results necessary to achieve my objective, and will accomplishing my key results be sufficient enough to achieve my objective? But you can use the same kind of language when you're thinking about your objectives themselves, right? Are all of these objectives necessary for me to get where I want to go? And will accomplishing all of these objectives get me to that longer term vision? So Ed, you say I may need improvements everywhere, but the question is, I may want to improve everywhere, but where is it actually necessary to meet the big picture? Like, which ones are necessary versus nice to have? Which ones are critical versus important, but maybe later? So using that test of necessary and sufficient can be really, really helpful, just to help you narrow things down, help you to focus, help you to get to a place where, ideally you would get down to, like, what is the one important thing that I need to do, and actually rank the importance of your OKRs. Doesn't mean that you maybe stick to only one, but you can get to a place where you understand, if nothing else happened, what do I need to accomplish?
Focus is a necessarily wasteful exercise. And these 2 questions are going to force you to identify and eliminate the waste. Necessary, but sufficient. Anything extraneous that's not captured here needs to be necessarily removed in the interest of focus.
So we're at 12:20. I want to, hopefully we have some time to have a little bit of conversation about some of the OKRs that you came up with. But before we do that, just so that we get to sort of the end of everything I want to talk about today, if you can flip to the last slide. What we've done today is gotten to a place where you have sort of started to draft what your OKRs are. We've talked about the necessary and sufficient tests, but there's more to happen, right? This isn't something that you can do in 20 minutes. And so what I want to do is give you a framework, a path to follow once you leave this conversation to really nail this down. So the next step is really to edit your OKRs. And I suggest you don't do that today, quite frankly. You might take a run at it today, but this is a thing that you want to walk away from. Just forget about it. Write it down, close the book, close the file, whatever the case may be, go away and come back. Because those fresh eyes are really going to make a difference. And that is the thing that's going to help you, really get down to what's essential. So 5 guiding questions here, which OKRs aren't essential, and can be eliminated, or are essential and need to be kept. A couple of other guiding questions, have you considered all your stakeholders? So if there are other people in your organization, people outside of your organization, who needs to be connected to this, or who's going to be involved in this moving forward? And this speaks to potentially some resource bottlenecks that you might have. Can you track it? So you need to be able to measure these things. Just saying, I'm going to grow my business is not going to help you to know if you have landed where you need to land. So the question is, can I know if I'm successful based on tracking? Where are unseen implications of bottlenecks? So this goes back to your question, Ben, about, things are going to start to bubble up, but you also want to start to test, okay, if I put all of these things on my list, if I'm going to try to accomplish all of these things, what are the bottlenecks that either already exist or that I'm going to create by going down this path? And then, of course, most important, but sometimes forgotten, is this OKR actually propelling my business forward? Because we sometimes, again, build them because we think it's the right thing to do, because it was something that was on our list last year, because someone else in the organization thinks it's important. But getting really clear about what is pushing your business forward is, again, going to help you really refine and focus, which is the name of the game. So so next step, once you've created your draft, once you've sort of taken an initial run at it, step away, come back, really get critical about what you have written there. And then take advantage of getting some feedback. So, whoever that community is for you, certainly if you are part of Momentum Mastermind or Operation Scale, that's work that we can do with you, whether it's Ahmed, myself, also your peers, have conversations, other folks that you have in your life that you trust and, want input from. Caveat here, be careful. This isn't the time to get feedback from 14 different people that are going to push you in a bunch of different directions and, have you grow your list, but be smart about who you're asking, the kind of conversations you're having. Also would suggest to the folks in our community here this isn't just about getting feedback, this is about giving feedback. So this is an opportunity to share, to have conversations with people that are in different, sectors or stages of business or whatever the case may be than you are, to really kind of open your mind and get a sense of what's going on out there and what could be helpful to your plan. And then the next step, once you've nailed down your annual OKRs, is to break it down. So Ahmed started speaking about, quarterly objectives. What you want to do is start chunking this down into things that are manageable and that you can, test and measure all the way through the year. So you want to take your annual OKRs and figure out, all right, what has to happen in Q1? And this might mean that you divide your OKR into, 4 equal pieces. It might be something that you're ramping up. That's especially true, generally speaking, when we're talking about revenue growth or, delivery growth or, number of deals you're going to close, or specifically it could be a ramp. So figure out what that looks like. Get clear on what you want to deliver in the quarter, and then break it down even further into your first monthly sprint. And spoiler, this is something that we're going to start doing more formally in MoMA and Upscale, which is we're going to start delivering, among a bunch of other fun changes that you're going to hear about in the coming weeks, a monthly sprint process. So basically, we're going to once a month get together and have you go through a similar exercise that we went through today, but building out what needs to happen in the next 4 weeks. So we'll start that as a routine in our programs moving forward. But for you right now, what you want to do is annual OKRs, quarterly OKRs, what needs to happen in January to be able to move forward.
In other words, we're going to force focus whether you like it or not.
Correct. Correct. Ed, do you want to come off mute and just tell me a bit more about your question? Any tools you can suggest for this exercise? What is it?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, is a particular software or mind map, or like is any kind of good structure which you guys found useful for this exercise, or you would rather do this as a free form at this point? So that's my question.
So my answer is yes and no. I'm happy to share the kinds of things that we found helpful, that I found helpful. But what's really important is the content, not the tool. And what I find, especially about some of these OKR tools, is that they can become really bossy. And you don't want a tool that is sort of forcing. This is why we're on our second or third one right now, because the previous ones just didn't work. So mind map, I think, Ed, you said that's a great way to do it. And that's actually how we built out our OKRs before we put them into the tool that we use. Mind map is great, basically to create a hierarchy. So this is, what's most important. These are the things that are going to feed up into it. And then this is how we break it down into quarter. That's a brilliant way to do it, that anyone can access, right, for free without having a whole bunch of time to get some kind of system in place. As I said to Annie, we use ally.io, which is good, but it's also pretty intense in terms of like an actual software tool. Roxanne's point, 12-week year, that there's a bunch of structures and books that are really helpful. And I can probably we've got a list of 3 or 4 that we've utilized as resource that we can throw in the portal when we post everything from today as well.
Good old fashioned,
yeah, using like
pen and paper is always a good move.
Yeah,
the tools are really only, I think, useful / necessary when you're dealing with larger teams in collaboration.
I think that's true, Ahmed, of OKR tools, but things like mind maps, Mazdak's point about like using Trello or Asana or something like that just helps you track everything, definitely can make life easier, because I think the problem with pen and paper is people don't reopen the pen and paper. So if there's something that you can attach a reminder to, or create some kind of cadence where it pops up in front of your face, beyond what we're going to do for you, can be really helpful. Yeah, Dottie, you have a question?
Not a question, I would just reinforce what Ahmed said about the pen and paper. I took all my notes in OneNote, and I have an iPad, and I didn't even use but I used a pen and paper because there is proven scientific, research that says that there is different parts of your brain that are accessed when you take pen to paper, and that there's more creativity, more innovation, more ideas that will come through when you're actually doing pen to paper versus on the, typing in a computer or something like that. And so I'll just take a picture and pop it in OneNote when I'm done. But I think there is a different chemistry that happens in your brain when you're actually taking pen to paper.
Yeah, absolutely true. I think that's a good point, Dottie. I think we're talking about 2 things, right? One, which is creating them, which that can be really helpful. The other is tracking and, paying attention to having a structure in place to keep things rolling. So we're at time pretty much. If anyone needs to leave, feel free. We can stick around a bit longer for questions if that's helpful, but don't feel bad if you need to go, because I know that we are at the end of the time that you set aside for today.
Yeah, I've got a few minutes to hang out. If people have questions and want to jam for a bit, we can do that. I'll answer Ben's question from the beginning because I've been thinking about it the whole time. And I'm happy to take a couple more if people have questions and if it's useful. So Ben asked, what distractions came up in those kind of formative years for us as an organization? That was the question, Ben? Is that right?
Yeah, you had identified what the focus was, but what were some of those distracting, those minor bottlenecks?
Yeah, and the reason why telling you what the distractions were was so hard because like they're innumerable. Like I don't even know. Like it was everything, literally, right? And it would change by the month. So probably what's more useful is for me to articulate to you how I overcame the distractions, like the tools I use to prevent myself from getting distracted. It's probably a more practically useful answer. So I'll give you three things. One is constantly reinforcing and reminding myself what my unique ability is. I'm using Dan Sullivan's term, unique ability, but call it whatever you want, genius zone, sweet spot. Like what is the thing that you can do that nobody else can do that you are just simply world class at, right? Because that's the thing that you want to be spending as much time as possible on. Okay, and as much time as possible when you're a solo could be like, 30 to 50%. And at my stage with a team of 20 should be like 90 to 100%. So it's gonna vary as you grow and your team grows to the extent that you choose to grow a team. But at any given point in time, your goal should be to maximize the amount of time spent on unique ability activities, the stuff that only you can do, the stuff that you can't hire out for, delegate, hire a consultant for, etc. That's where a real profit is made, in that zone. So that's one defense against distraction, right? Because if it's not unique ability, my first question is, who else can do it? Do we have somebody on the team? In the beginning, the answer was no. We didn't, right? But then it was, can I hire somebody? Is there a freelancer? Is there a consultant that can come in? Is there somebody else that I can bring in to do this work? And can I, ultimately afford that fee in the interest of staying in my unique ability? And the answer wasn't always yes, right? But the question was important to ask, right? And often I did things that I didn't want to do that weren't unique ability because I had to do them, come to the territory, right? That's one, unique ability focus. Two is hiring. So as cash flow got better, I would aggressively hire. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean full-time, right? Could have been full-time resources, could have been part-time resources, could have been freelancers. I would aggressively hire and to get the portfolio of non-unique ability activities off of my plate. I was very aggressive in doing so. That also meant I didn't make very much money, but that's okay because I was playing the long game, not trying to squeeze out profit in the short term. So I was totally okay to make very little money, very little profit for a very long time and pay myself, by the way, very little, because I was growing a business, not trying to optimize for profit in 2018 or 2019 to be honest with you, we're only going to optimize for profit next year. Like that's now becoming a priority because we've been scaling, and profit and scale, they don't go together. Right? So that's two, is hiring. And then three, I think really important to note, is constantly reinforcing my own belief in our success. Like to me, that's the ultimate hedge against distraction, is believing that what we're doing, the model we're running, the path that we're on is going to work, and we're going to be successful, and we will see results. That's the antidote against shiny object syndrome. Because, this is true for me, this is true for you. I could run a million different businesses. I could start a SaaS business tomorrow. I could sell products. I could write books. I could sell courses. How many models are there? There's an infinite number of models. And when you're in the daily grind and things are difficult, as they are on this path, it's really easy for your brain to think the grass is greener on that side or that model or this whatever, right? And the truth that people who sell these models won't tell you is that you can make pretty much any model work if you know how to work it. And so that was constantly reinforcing myself that, no, this is the model. This is the model. I can make this work. There are other models, sure, but there's no reason why I can't make this model work the way I want it to.
And I just want to say something else about distractions. Always this tension around figuring out if a distraction is actually a distraction or if a distraction is the next really good thing that you need to do. And my recommendation, probably not surprisingly, but and something that we're working on is making sure that you have a really good process in place to assess when those things come up. So what we know is now we have a very structured plan for next year, right? It's very clear. We know what our priorities are. I also know that Ahmed's going to have 14 ideas that are new every day for all of 2022. But what we can do now is measure them against, are they going to get us the objectives or to the goals that we have in our future? If not, then there's a conversation, right? About, okay, well, wait a minute. Is it important for some other reason? Why would we or wouldn't we do it? But having a cadence that you've set up for yourself where you don't just jump at those things, but you also don't just set them aside. You just have a clear way of figuring out if they're going to contribute to, again, that greater overall picture that you're heading towards.
Know thyself too, right? Like Carrie alluded to the fact that, I'm a quick start and I like doing new things. So I'm going to start coming up with things that maybe weren't a priority. And we know that about me, and we're hedging against that. We went this whole OKR process, like not entirely, but that's a big part of the reason why. That's the motivation. And we now have a thought partnership, me and Carrie, where we've developed the goals together, right? We've documented them together. So in February, when I say, hey, Carrie, we should do this, she's going to pull up our OKRs and go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, all right, good idea. Tell me, where does that fit in, mister? Right? We're going to have that conversation, right? So having this process done for you is going to, first of all, create that structure, create that focus, but then find people to hold you accountable to it. We're those people for you. Absolutely. Bring them to us. Hey, should I do this thing? Ask us that in February. And we're going to say, what are your OKRs for this year, Ben? And sometimes things change, and that's okay, right? But the important thing is to ask the question, have things changed? Should you shift your focus, or are you getting distracted?
Your third point and the point that Carrie just made have been huge for me, because people, at least once a month, someone tells me to write a book. And like, I've already written the equivalent of a book. These are handouts I give my clients. I can put them together. They can be a book. I just have to edit it. I haven't made the book because I know Ahmed would yell at me. But now you've given me the system to understand why I shouldn't do the book. I could make that process work for me, but I'm in this process now. And the goals, even the half-finished ones that we just did, making a book and trying to build an audience to sell the book to and getting enough of the book sold and build it, all of that is not getting me where I need to go nearly as quickly, is not sufficient, is not necessary compared to the path that I'm on now, the model that I'm following now. So thank you. That was huge.
I'm only now writing the first book. And even that, I'm ghostwriting it. I'm not actually writing it myself.
Well, the reason I think we both laughed, Ben, and we were not laughing at you, but I'm laughing because we have this lovely mind map of all of our goals and objectives. And then I'm opening the curtain here. I'm going to hope you don't mind. We have this extra little bit, which is like, Ahmed's going to write a book and a bunch of other pet projects that we, quite frankly, have not been able to fit into the objectives as yet. So the book is one thing that's still, kind of floating out there on its own. But I think the point that you're making, Ben, is figuring out the why and does it make sense, as opposed to doing it because other people said you should.
There are things that I want to do that don't fit into our plan. That's life. I'll get to them one day. Doesn't need to be this year.
Roxanne.
No, I was gonna, part of that, doing the 12-week plan, because I've kind of gone through this. I think the most important thing that I have to do personally is sort of this avoidance of overwhelm. So I really just try not to do more than 3 things a quarter in terms of what it is that I think that I'm going to accomplish. 5 at the broad end, so I think this is just about prioritizing. You went through this with your OKR stuff, but I think a lot of this is just prioritizing if this is the goal, and then there's a reverse engineer and what actually needs to happen in this quarter for me to basically be able to kind of do that. And so I really just try and, I kind of top myself out at 3. I'm not a very good multitasker. My brain can only go one place at a time. And I think most people are like that. I think they actually proved that. I think we have a cognitive scientist in our group, BJ, but you know, your brain, you think you're multitasking, but your brain's really just concentrating on one thing at any one time. And the other one is kind of at a loss. So that was the only thing that I wanted to add. So thank you.
Which is really, it's really interesting to me in retrospect, like when I shared those, you know, year by year, what the bottleneck was and what the focus was. I think I mentioned this in passing. I didn't have the clarity on that back then that I have now. Like, that's retrospect. I didn't necessarily think that that was the one thing we had to do. It's naturally what got done, right? But I, truth be told, had my attention split, my focus split in many different directions. And it's interesting that in retrospect, the most important thing got done, but it could have gotten done a whole lot easier with less friction, with less headache, if I at the time had identified that as the one thing and positioned everything else accordingly.
Another great book, Focus, by the guy from, who was it? And it's just the one thing, you know, and do you remember who the author is? It's the guy from the real estate brokerage. So I can't.
No, I don't
remember
recall
his
the name. Yeah, that essentialism. There's a lot of good books in that genre, but I appreciate your insight there, Roxanne. Any other questions here today, folks, before we let you go? Let you loose on your OKRs. You all good to go? How are we feeling about next year? Heads nodding. We feeling good? Awesome. So look forward to some of the structures we're going to be helping you with to get this stuff done, nailed down, and implemented heading into next year. And as you go forth here on your exercise of writing down your OKRs, editing them, finalizing them, feel free to bring those questions to the next call, whatever it is, if you're MoMA or upscale. Looking forward to having those conversations with you and getting you that focus.